This is the second video that is discussing Betty's story. That was one of our case studies for the end of last week. And in this one, we're not going to talk about Carl like we did in the first one, but instead we're going to talk about Ross. So Ross, as you may recall, is Betty's biological child, and she had that child with her predeceased husband. And Ross has been involved in the family business. He has been generally helping out, it seems. And, there's some questions a little bit about how much Betty is keeping a hand in versus how much does she really know is actually going to go on. At some point, we see that there are concerns by Ross that Betty is getting forgetful. So just to remember that Ross and Betty seem to have had a good relationship. Ross is the power of attorney for property, which Betty appointed him, as well as a director and officer of the company. And the company is a heating and cooling company that she and her husband, Ross's dad, grew together. And she also started issuing him shares so that he could share in the profits with her. And he was doing a really great job. When she got married to Al, she sort of stopped paying so much attention to the business. You see also that Ross is trying to be generally helpful, and he would help with opening up the cottage. But he started getting concerned, as we said, that Betty was getting forgetful, and he ascribed that to the stress of dealing with the Al situation. So he starts offering to go to the cottage and take care of some of those issues for her. But when he goes to the cottage, he finds that the locks have been changed. And when he told Betty, and the two of them called Carl, which is the child of the second marriage, which is her stepchild, he said that, well, since they're separated, Betty and Al, therefore she could not use the cottage anymore. And we know that that is quite inappropriate. She is not separated from him in any legal way. He's just in some type of chronic care, alternative level of care situation. So we know that Carl is acting wrongly when he does that. Further going into the question of how Ross is dealing with it, we see as well that there's some concerns by the recently returned Dorothy. And we'll talk about Dorothy in the next video. But just to flag, we see that Dorothy is concerned upon her return and moving in with Betty that how much Ross might be making. How much did he pay himself? Ross tells them that it's his business too, and he has shares, in the business. And so we see that Dorothy starts kind of putting her nose into this circumstance. On the whole, we also see that Ross is concerned about some of the aspects that Dorothy is wanting to engage in. And again, we'll talk more about that when we speak specifically about Dorothy. But we see that there's this tension, I guess, on a couple of different levels. We see the tension with the other sister, with Dorothy saying, well, I want you to spend a lot of money on something that may or may not be appropriate. We see generally Betty is looking to Ross as kind of the good son to help out of the mess with regards to the finances in Carl's circumstance. We see that Ross thinks that both Betty and Al should live in the house and should have the paid caregivers. But when Ross tries to speak to Carl about this, so the stepbrothers, if you will, Carl get angry and told him that Betty and he had sponged off of the family, and that was the end of it. So now we see that Ross is in conflict as well. So Betty's power of attorney for finance, which is Ross, and the Al's power of attorney for finance, property, which is Carl, are also now in conflict. So we know now what's happening in the social aspect of the situation, what's happening in terms of the financial situation. Well, we see that, let's just take Ross's position as the power of attorney for property for Betty. So does he have a role, first of all, in trying to sort out the financial mess? Yes, he does. Because as the acting attorney, he's supposed to keep apprised of the circumstances that deals with finance. But does he have any direct role in how to sort out the aspects from Bob's power of attorney. He does not. So he's an interested party. He's, rightly trying to help out, but he doesn't really have any power much to do it. He's been acting as an attorney, it seems. It's a little unclear, but it seems that he's been acting. But he also, of course, is a director and officer of the company, has shares of the company. There's nothing inappropriate about that. We just have to make sure that Dorothy's concerns about how Ross has been running the company are not borne out. So there's some query there. Is Ross doing something untoward with regards to the company? Is he double dipping in some fashion? Is he acting inappropriately? So if we wanted to address that issue, Dorothy could call for an accounting. Or Betty could call for an accounting more appropriately. But Dorothy may, as an interested party, also ask for an accounting. We see that Betty is still capable. She's assumed to be capable unless it's determined otherwise. She's becoming forgetful, but that again does not necessarily mean that she is incapable. So when we get at this particular issue, what we see is that there's some potential conflict happening, that Ross is trying to do the right thing when it comes to dealing with the GIC matters. But Betty, seems to be able to still manage her own finances unless she's deemed otherwise. Now, if the matter comes more forward that Betty's forgetfulness is actually coming to a head such that she may have some type of cognitive impairment, perhaps pursuant to a dementia, then the hope would be that capacity assessment might be able to be made, and we could find out whether or not she would be able to change her designation, or whether or not it's now kind of fixed in stone with Ross. So Ross, on the whole, is not a deeply problematic character in this case, but we don't quite know whether Dorothy's suspicions with regards to Ross's finances holds up, or is it more likely that Dorothy is herself trying to be a bit more enterprising. Okay, thanks very much. We'll move to the next video, which will be about Dorothy.